So hello, I am going to be talking about mastering the developer tools today and how you can leverage that for faster prototyping and better debugging. This is my Twitter handle. You can follow me there. I will post slides afterwards. So first of all, I wanted to say congrats to the DC sports fans. We won the Stanley Cup. After years and years of DC sport disappointment, we finally broke the curse, so hooray. A little bit about me. My name is Ksenia Coulter. I'm a developer at Washington Post. I work on Arc Publishing. We're a software as a service part of the Washington Post. We work with other large publications like LA Times, Chicago Tribune, New York Daily News. Our most recent client is La Parisienne, which is in Paris. Some of my very lucky coworkers are there right now. You can find out more about what I'm up to on my website. I live in Bethesda with my two very adorable and very fat cats. They're great. So browsers are really powerful. They really have come a long way since the beginning, you know, although we do make fun of Edge and IE still. But browsers can do a lot. And if you know how to leverage the tools that are right there available for you in the browser, you can do a lot. You can even stop using your text editor and just code directly in the browser, and I'll show you how. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the Elements tab and debugging HTML. We're going to play with styles. We're going to write JavaScript in the browser. We're going to debug performance, which is a huge thing, especially since Google has announced that they're now taking it into consideration in the search rankings. So everyone's been really focused on performance, especially at the Washington Post. We're a media company, and a lot of our traffic comes from search. And we're going to talk a little bit about mobile testing. Okay, so let's talk about navigating the HTML in the Elements tab. So we're going to focus on this, look at how we can copy, duplicate, delete elements right there. Scroll into view, this handy little search bar, and let's get right into it. Okay, so here I have a simple little website with just 3 boxes in a parent container. So let me just close this for a second. So the way you open the DevTools is right-click, inspect. And right there, we see that the box that I just inspected is highlighted. Let me zoom in for people in the back. Oh, might be too much. Okay. So you see as I hover over each element, it's getting highlighted here. We can drag and drop. So here, now the white box is on top instead of on the bottom. So I told you that we can rapidly prototype in the browser, so let me just jump right to that. When we go to our sources here, usually we have all of the files that make up the web page right here. What you can do is add a folder to workspace, find it in your actual machine. So for me, it was in my documents, DevFestDC. I'm going to cancel because I already did this. And you see that all of these now appear over here in the browser. I can look at my HTML. I can duplicate it here. If I refresh, oh, sorry. If I switch over to my, what's happening? Oh, I didn't save. Command S to save your changes. I refresh, now there's 2 white boxes, and when I switch over to my text editor, you see that there's a second one here. So we don't actually need to go back and forth now. You can just write it right here. Okay, so let me just copy this element. Copy. And I'm going to paste it a couple times to make the page longer. Okay. So let's use our fancy search here. You can search by words, elements, but my favorite feature here is that you can actually search by the CSS selector. So if I go box first, child, it will find every element that is the first child that has the class of box and is the first child of its parent. So that's pretty neat. And then when I find one of these in the Elements tab and I want to go straight there, you can also right-click and scroll into View. So that's pretty neat. One little thing I wanted to show you is why you cannot trust screenshots. So we can go in here and actually right-click this, edit as HTML. I'm going to highlight all of this and say, we love Bing. Oh, look, Google Chrome just tweeted that they love Bing. No, they didn't. If I refresh, it doesn't save, so we're safe. We're safe from that kind of trolling. Okay, so let's talk about navigating styles now. We're going to look at the Styles tab, the proverbial box model, that's the box, computed styles, style rules over here, and pseudo elements. So the Styles tab is usually right there next to your elements. This is the box. Let's inspect one of these things here. We can see that the element has 300 by 100 dimensions, no padding, border of 2 pixels, and margin bottom of 10. So this gives you a nice little overview of what's going on with the element. You can also see all of the rules that apply to it, from most specific to least specific. This check mark right here, you can toggle this. So when I take away the height, everything collapses. When I take away the set width, since div is a block level element, it expands to 100% of its parent. So usually if you're looking on a very large application or website, there'll be a bunch of rules here that are crossed out, so it's not always obvious what's actually being applied to your element. So that's why I really love the Computed tab, is over here, it gives you only the rules that apply to this particular element you're inspecting, and what's going on there and where it's coming from. So when you expand one of these little arrows here, you can actually see where that style comes from. When you click on this, it will take you directly to the document where that property is being set up. So you can actually find it, and since we already hooked this up to my documents, if I edit anything here, it'll automatically save, and I don't need to change anything. Another thing I really like is this color selector. Whenever you have a color, it has this box next to it with the color. If you click on it, it opens up this dialog where you can change the color to whatever you want. And also this little color picker, you can hover over any element on the page, including images, and pick your favorite color. If you see something on a website and you go, oh, I love this color and I really want it, just click on this and it'll give you that exact color. And it also gives you this little hex number for it, so you can copy paste if you wanted that. So let's see. Now I changed it to green. If I go to my CSS, hold on. Where was this? So now if I save this file, it'll stay green. Yep. Okay, let's change this back to red to make sure it's still semantic. Cool. Oh, right. And let's very briefly look at the search here. So we have, we can force the state of the element, hover, active, etc., to see what CSS comes up for it. And this little plus sign here, while you can add the rules that already exist in your CSS here, you can also add a new rule and make it anything you want. Whatever it is. Another thing to mention is this element.style is the most specific. It'll actually act as inline style. So if I give it padding of 10, and I look in the Elements tab, right here you see style equals padding of 10. So that's the only exception about saving to your files. Because it is inline styles and it's written in this Elements tab in the HTML, it's actually not going to save when I refresh. Okay. Now, let's get to the good part. We all want to know about JavaScript in the browser. So we're going to look at the console, at how to trace the arrows, and this preserve log over here. We're also going to look at breakpoints, how to navigate the breakpoints, and also this watch statement right here. Okay. So we're going to start with the console. Right here already you see that it's printing something out to the console. If we look in the JavaScript here, you can see here's the console logs. So I think a lot of us have debugged with the console logs. There is one problem with it. It only reflects the last state, the most recent state of that object. So it's not going to give you any information about the mutations of that object as it goes through your document. So here we have a for loop that goes from 0 to 10. So I equals 10 is never actually relevant because then it skips and exits out of the for loop. But when we log it to the console, we see that I is 10. So let's look closely at what other options we have for debugging. The best one is breakpoints. You can do it by putting debugger statement in your JavaScript, but you can also just do it in the browser. So by clicking on the line number, you see this blue arrow come up. So that's going to be our breakpoint. So when I restart, it's going to pause. So the great part about this is the pauses inside of that scope. So we can see what's happening at every iteration of the loop. So right now, we can open the console tab over here. We can say, what is I? I is 0. What is our array? Nothing. So this pauses before this line executes. So we're going to play this again and see what happens. I is now 1, and the array now has one element in it, which is 0. We're going to play this again. I is now 2. Array now has 2 elements. But that's kind of tedious. So let's add a watch statement. I'm going to watch for I, and I'm going to watch for array. So notice how with every play, this changes, and you can actually see what's going on. Now, what do those little other things here do? If I press resume, it just skips to the next breakpoint, which in this case is itself for every iteration of the loop. Well, we see there's another little variable declaration right after. So if I jump to the next function call, it'll just stop before executing this. So if you have a longer function with more complicated things, you don't have to put a breakpoint on every single line. You can just use this little arrow to keep going. that's a very useful way to following the stack. And then once you've left breakpoints all over the place and you don't want them anymore, you can just deactivate all of them with this one button. Let me get back to the console real quick. In our JavaScript here, I have this commented out. So, whoops, did not mean to put breakpoints here. I'll just uncomment it here because it's easier. Okay, so when I refresh, it throws an arrow, and we can see that the first line here says on line 17, it's named function, it's called throw error, and that's what produced the error. And then it goes to the next thing that actually threw the error, and it's anonymous because just that line there does not have a name. So you can click on this and see exactly where your error is coming from. Another neat little thing I want to show you is searching across all files. So let's go to something maybe more complicated. I have a website for DCS pulled up here, and in my console, this is Command Option F. You can also just go and I believe sources and right click and search all files. So I want to see if the developers left any console log statements. So now this searches the entirety of all the files, and I can jump straight to where the console log is. And you can see how that could be useful if you're trying to trace a particular variable or function throughout your entire page, and you want to quickly be able to jump there, put a breakpoint there to make sure that it pauses every time that function is getting invoked, or add a little thing. So that is all for this portion. Now let's talk about performance. This is something a lot of us have been working on lately, and Chrome has a lot of great tools that help you figure out how to improve the speed of your website, how your website is going to act on slower connections, on mobile phones. So we're going to look at this performance tab first. You can see that there's a lot going on. You can have screenshots, you've got all of these colors, you have summary of what actually happening. So let's go over that real quick. So the yellow is our function calls, so that's your JavaScript. The purple would be the recalculate style and layout. What the recalculate style does is gets all of the style rules, evaluates each selector, and matches it against what's in the DOM, and then calculates a computed style for each element. And the layout would be the geometry of the page, so it's your floats, your grid, your flex box, stuff like that. And then the last part would be paint. So that's after you calculated all of these rules, what applies to each element, and actually putting the element on the page and painting each pixel where it's supposed to be. So this is obviously a very heavy operation, computationally intense, and can be pretty slow on low CPU devices. We're going to talk about coverage, which over here can tell you what percentage of your JavaScript and your CSS rules are actually being used by current page. And right here in this dialog, once you click on one of these, it's going to give you, so if you click on one of these, it's going to give you this document where in red it highlights the rules that are not being applied, and in green the rules that are actually being used by the page. So this is a great way to assess whether or not you need to tinker with your Webpack, do more code splitting, allocate resources for pages differently, especially if it's, in the 50s or lower. And then we're going to talk about this awesome new audit tab in Chrome. So we're going to mostly look at performance, best practices, and accessibility. You can also audit for progressive web apps, which have been really, really popular in the past few years. And if you don't have a PWA, you can use this to kind of do error-driven development, where you're like, oh, what are all the things that don't meet the criteria, and then convert your app into PWA. And then we're going to talk about the different options here. You can choose mobile or desktop, and you can choose to throttle to kind of make it more real world. Okay. So here in the Performance tab, let me clear this. You can have this record button and see that I have screenshots in memory checked. I record, I restart. This page starts to load. This is profiling, and we can probably stop it now. So now it's going to generate a profile of what just happened. So I'm sorry if this is a little small, but there's a lot of information here. So here, when I hover over this, you can see what the page looked like at the moment and the time on top. So let me just use my pointer here. So for example, 500 milliseconds about, this is what the page was like. So this first 4 frames of blank, that's nothing is happening. And you can see there's a lot of JavaScript going on and a little bit of green, which is we know that's our paint layer. And here's where the paint spikes. So we see that more and more items are actually getting painted on here. And this is the snapshot, and you can kind of zoom in on things that you're interested in, and then go to the summary. It'll tell you, like, oh, for this moment, scripting was taking up the most. You can kind of look at what specific functions were being used when and how long they took. I think that's a bit of an overkill. You can definitely improve your performance that way, but you will be crying by the end of it. So here we're going to go to More Tools and choose Coverage. Okay, so we can see that they are using jQuery, but only 47% of it is actually being used on this page. Same for this. We can scroll around and see what JavaScript isn't being used. CSS rules. Okay, so now we're going to come over to the audits. I'm going to perform an audit. I'm going to uncheck this just because I think it might take a long time. So right now we're doing it on desktop and we are not doing any throttling. If you wanted a more realistic perspective, most people are probably going to be accessing this on 3G. Google has done some research, and the average speed on mobile networks are 3G. Okay. Wow, not bad. On desktop, it actually performs pretty well. I run this on mobile, and it was like, the score was 23 as opposed to 95. So here, it gives you a bunch of information. It, again, gives you the screenshots of what's happening, and then first meaningful paint. So first time there's something on the page and there's a user can derive some sort of meaning from it. First interactive. So first interactive is when you first can actually click and interact with a page. You know, sometimes when something loads and there's a button, you click on it 3 times and nothing happens, and then 5 seconds later, all of a sudden you have all of these different pop-ups. That's your first interactive. So if you don't have this interaction happening soon enough, your users are going to get really frustrated. And then consistently interactive, it's the same. That's pretty good. There's probably not a lot of interactions on DCist, so that's why it loads in like 3 seconds. But here we can see what's not going right for this website. We have a bunch of off-screen images. So that means they're not lazy loading. So all of these images are actually being loaded at the same time as I refresh the page. This is a big one. a lot of people fail on this. So Google recommends using newer formats like JPEG 2000, XR, or WebP, rather than PNG or JPEG. And here it tells you how much more data you can save by using one of these newer formats. So this image can be reduced by 95%. And images actually is what slows down most of the internet. So this is a really good clue on how to very quickly get a great performance boost out of your website. Optimize all the images and lazy load. Render blocking scripts, so that means the script is running and nothing else can run because it's occupying the call stack, occupying that thread. Some of the things can be done asynchronously, so maybe that's what you want to do. Maybe you want to make your scripts smaller. Optimize images, kind of the same idea. Render blocking style sheets, the same thing. All right. And then they pass a bunch of best practices, but this recommends HTTPS 2, rel no opener, et cetera, et cetera. So you can do this with any website, and it'll give you pretty good insights. So it's a super useful tab. Okay, so a lot of us have to develop for websites that are screen agnostic. So it has to look good on any size of screen, and it has to perform with some network throttling. So you can do this in Chrome as well. So there's this little icon here, and that toggles the mobile emulation. And they usually have a bunch of different screen sizes and devices you can emulate. It's not perfect. It's always best to test on a real device, but if you're doing something really quickly and you just want to make sure that nothing too glaringly bad is happening, you can do it here. Wow, what's happening here? All right, let's go on a different website. There we go. Okay, so now I'm gonna attempt something that hasn't worked for me when I've practiced every time, so bear with me. So I have an iPhone, and a lot of the market is geared towards iPhone users. They do spend more money. It's true, research. So a lot of us have to deal with iPhones. So I'm going to switch over to Safari real quick and show you this neat little thing, if it works. So I have my phone connected to the computer with a USB, and you can see here that Safari recognizes it. So now I'm going to navigate to a website. Now it sees that I'm on a tab. Let's see, let me go to New York Times, for example. Okay. Yeah, so this has happened before where it closes on me. Facebook? Yes. So now, as I'm hovering over this, you can see that well, not all of you, but my phone is actually getting that blue highlight when I inspect. And this is a production website, and this is a really easy way to debug something that's breaking on an iPhone in production. You can use all the same tools with console and breakpoints, debugging, so that's really useful. Chrome does the same thing for Android. but I don't have an Android device to demo on. Okay. So for one more thing for this that I just showed, on your phone you have to go to settings for Safari and click this, make sure this web inspector here is allowed. Otherwise you won't be able to see this. Okay, so let's quickly review what we did here. We looked at how we can play around with HTML elements in the Elements tab. We looked at how we can use the browser for quick prototyping by saving everything to your local documents. We played with styles and colors. We wrote JavaScript in the browser. We debugged without having to put anything in our code. We looked at a bunch of performance metrics and seen how we can improve performance. And we touched a little bit on mobile emulation. So here are some resources. I'll post up the slides on my Twitter later. These are some great things over here. This is really fun. This is specifically for Firefox. Whoops. This is for Firefox, and it's this beautiful, beautiful website about deep sea creatures, and you can actually play with animations and play with Firefox's animation tools to make the animations come to life and learn something about deep sea creatures. Anyway, this was my talk about mastering developer tools. Again, my name is Ksenia Coulter. This is my Twitter handle, and you can find slides later there. Thank you.